Hey, well, welcome everyone. We're glad to be here. My name is Doug Troy. I'm the coordinator of application development. And do you want to introduce yourself, Cam?
Hi, Jake and I'm Cam Shriver, Myaamiaki. I'm a historian. So I'm up here with someone who just received a medal from the Miami Nation last night. And so I don't know if what I say will be medal worthy, but I think the project is. And so there's a lot of pressure, but we'll let the medal winner go first.
Well, that was pretty smooth handing that off to me there, Cam. Well, again, we're pleased to be here to tell you about a new project that we're working on, Aacimwahkionkonci, or Stories from the Land. The website address is up there, aacimwahkionkonci.org. And we also want to recognize the support of the Myaami tribe, Myaamia Center, and National Endowment for the Humanities. Okay, I think it's safe to click the clicker, I think. Let's see. Okay, I'll just give a brief introduction to the project, and then Cam and I will tell you more about it. So the goal of the project is to support tribes in their cultural and language reclamation efforts. So American Indian tribes rely particularly on land rights to establish their rights, strengthen their community, and maintain culture. So Aacimwahkionkonci is an interactive historical atlas following the Myaamiaki resettlement patterns through Indiana, Kansas, and Oklahoma. So as I mentioned, the goal of the project is to enable tribal members, the public, and current landowners to access the rich history that define their land over time. The project has been in the process for a while. So we've had team members come and go. So this is kind of a history of people that are currently on the project or were on the project. So we have kind of three groups of people: the technology development team, which is my group, Cam's historical research team, and then we have a mapping team from the GIS department, and we have support from the libraries and archives management team. And I should mention Carol Katz, who's our graphics designer for all of our projects. We appreciate Carol's help. So a little bit of the project history. We've been supported over time by several grants, 2012 Historic Preservation Grants, 2014 NPS grants, and our present support from the NEH and all of the Myaami tribe community. So my part of the presentation is just to kind of show you just a quick snapshot of how the project might be used by a tribal member or a member of the community. And then Cam will tell you more about the background and the work that kind of going on behind the scenes supporting the project. So this is an example of the landing page, just the top part of the website. And the question here is, we have an ancestor, Mary Wells Walcott, and we want to know something about where she lived and when she lived. So I've typed her name there into the search bar. I hit search, and the site comes up with a list of the database matches for that person. And in this particular case, there's just one person with that last name, Mary Wells Walcott. And if there were more of them, they'd be shown in the list. And if you see a name that you're interested in learning more about, you click it. So you click on that bar in the table, and the record comes up from our database for the person of interest, in this case, Mary Wells Walcott. So you can see some basic demographic information in there. In this case, we have gender, date of birth, date of death, places, a brief biography, an image or a photo, and there's more information down below. So I'm going to kind of show you what comes down below, but you can see down at the bottom, there's a list of places related to that person and events related to that person. See what it looks like. If you can read that, you can see that there's an event, the Treaty of St. Mary's, and there's a related place, a particular reserve, her reserve, and those are links. If you scroll down a little bit, I couldn't put it all on that screenshot, there's a map. So this is where our GIS partners come in to support us. But there's a pin there showing where her reserve is located in Indiana. And you can scroll around that map, you can zoom in or out. So we're zoomed fairly far out here, but you can see that she's close there to the middle of Indiana. Back to the top of that page, I mentioned those links at the bottom. If I want to know more about that particular reserve, I can click on that link to the Mary Wells Reserve. And if I want to know more about the story of how that reserve came about, that 18 treaty, I can click on that link. So I clicked on the link on the left, her reserve, and this is the top part of what comes up for that record. And this is the kind of the detailed historic land record for that particular reserve. And you can see there's just a transcription that describes that piece of land. We've got some other information in there, like the county, the state, and in this particular case, we've got the number of acres associated with that place. There's a tab at the top there called Facts. This is the details about the reserve. And there's another tab called Timeline, which that's a new feature we're working on that'll show you how that piece of land evolved over time. So that's the reserve. Going back, if I click on the event, that's that 1818 treaty that I mentioned. So this is where I can kind of read more about the story or the details about that piece of land. And thanks to Cam's work here, we have a transcription of that treaty. Each of these records, the event, the place, or the person, have the related links down below. In this case, we have a link to additional historical documents related to that event. The treaty manuscript from this archive, this is external, but this is a public link with more information about that treaty. If I go back to that event page and I can scroll down and see a map of all the places related to that event. In this particular case, the Treaty of 1818. These are all of the reserves that came out of that event. So I can click on the polygons or on the places. In this case, I clicked on Mary Wells, and it pops up a window with additional links that you can follow to learn more about that place. So you can see here people related to that event, Mary Wells, that's her reserve. This is a zoomed in version, but an interesting thing about this is if you're a community member, you're a Myaamiaki person, you want to find out what other people lived around Mary Wells. You can scroll around, scroll around, pan in on this map. You can click on the other polygons, which are other reserves, and find out who lived nearby. So I've clicked on a couple here just to give you a feeling. I can go up to the one just above her reserve. That's Charlie's Ohio Reserve. And I can kind of scroll down, and there's another one, the Long Lois Reserve. So that's just one kind of snapshot of how we envision this project might be used by people to learn more about their land, where they came, where their ancestors came from, and where they lived. One last comment here. We're hoping one of our views in the future is to use some crowdsourcing to get more information from the community about people, places, and events. So this particular person had the bio and the photo contributed by a tribal citizen. So I wanted to recognize that as another source of information. So that's just a snapshot of how we hope the site will be used in the future. And now I'm going to turn it over to Cam to talk about kind of where all this information comes from.
Anyway, you hear me? Good. So, with a little bit of an overview that you have maybe now, we're just launching this thing today, I suppose. I don't know. But I want to think maybe holistically about our approaches over the last more or less decade to thinking about Myaamia land ownership and how to make it useful to people. So I'm speaking to the people in this room, the Myaamiaki in this room and watching. This is a reference resource primarily for you. So how well we've done that, I guess, is up for debate. But some of the key questions as a historian, how can we archive the history of Myaamia land ownership? Some of the things that I say here, I'm struck by how similar they are with Gabriella and Jerome's, what you just heard. How can we archive this incredible, complicated, inaccessible mass of stuff to make it useful? What do our users expect? How do they use sites like this, maps, archives? And I think more importantly, what do they actually want? And then what's the point of all of it? How can we think about the data in terms of community revitalization, connecting people with lands, with change over time? I think it's easier said than done, even though it's not even that easy to say. But let me give you a behind-the-scenes look at one reserve. So what this database is at the moment is really an archive of real estate. That includes individual and communal reservations in Indiana and Ohio, which began in 1795. Moving through the treaty process, dozen treaties in the Wabash homelands to Kansas, 300 allotments in Kansas. Continuing forward for some community members to 100, very even numbers, 100 allotments in Oklahoma. That's kind of the core set of lands that we're thinking about at the moment. I'll come back to that. Let's look at the Longloy Reserve. Reserve listed as reserve number 45. This is my hand. It's the only picture I took of what the data actually looks like in its raw form, which is a stack of tri-folded letters, about 70 letters, written back and forth from the Longloy family to the Central Bureau in Washington, D.C., and filed by clerks. And this is just one 2-square-mile section of Myaamia land. So you think about the history of the land ownership of this continent, the stack of papers would far exceed this building. So based on the 1818 treaty, it's quite clear that Elizabeth Longloy and Peter Longloy, which are just listed as the children of Longloy, but we can find out who that is, acquire title to this reserve that's numbered 45 by the Central Bureau, General Land Office, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So this is recorded in the Aacimwahkionkonci database, which you can find. You can see that their relationship at this moment is that they acquired title to this land, okay? So we're tracking land ownership over time. This is what that reserve looks like in the context of the 1818 treaty. So Central Indiana is relinquished by the Myaami tribe to the United States in this treaty, and in the process, Myaami individuals retain or reserve certain sections of land for families, for the nation, and for individuals. So this is often colloquially called the Big Miami Reserve here in the center, around Kokomo. But on the Ponce-au-Pichu River, the Wildcat Stomach River, is where the Longloys take their land. This is mapped, so thinking about the context of these places in relations with other places and people. This is that one piece of land put in the context of all land transactions that the Myaami Nation engaged in as a community, including out in Kansas and Oklahoma. So if you're interested in that kind of context. If we zoom in to that reserve, I want to use this slide to highlight a feature that people might be expecting, and hopefully that I use a lot, which is that you can choose different layers and base maps based on what you want to discover about the place. So as you're driving along, if you want to know the name of a road and exactly where your ancestors' reserve started, you can find that out. If you want to see something about the ecology, we can begin to add those layers to reference, let's say, the names of river names based underneath a layer of land ownership, for example. So this is the Longloy Reserve zoomed in. This is in Lafayette, Indiana, right near Purdue University, across the river. And one way that this might be used, I was talking to Jean Richardville yesterday, and the reason I was late to breakfast is because I was trying to find an answer. I think you were wondering about the Richardville allotments and where they were in relation to more or less the places that you know in Oklahoma. And so this is a zoom in. I just typed in Richardville, looked for Oklahoma, and I thought you were interested in Catherine Richardville. If I'm wrong, well, the other Richardvilles are right there anyways, so you can find them. But I just clicked on this piece of land. You can see that as you go past the nation's council house and powwow grounds, which are this circle here, kind of takes this dogleg to the right, and right on your left is Catherine's old allotment. Right to the north, if this was active on the screen, I would click on this polygon, a shape, and see that that's, I believe, Hannah Richardville, right to the north. I think Mary Richardville on this polygon, and I think Charles Woodson Richardville right there. So you could click on that, and again, notice that you could click on the place to learn the meets and bounds or the description of the survey of the land, as well as you can click on the 1889 allotment and see all of them. There are 100. Or click on the person's name, and you will bring up Megan Dory's biography of that person and any associated pictures that were in that allotment booklet that all the tribal citizens were given. So it's just kind of an interactive version of the allotment book. If you're aware of the allotment booklet, I like that, and I wanted to digitize it. Okay, going back to the hand picture. I should recognize that I took this picture with Doug Pakongi, and I went to National Archives to document all of these pages. Through an intense process of labor using student laborers, paid for by, I believe, the Myaami tribe and the National Endowment for the Humanities, potentially. They have extracted metadata from all of these thousands, something like 3,000 pages of handwritten manuscripts to identify who are the people being talked about, putting them in some chronological order or an order that you could move them around depending on what you're looking for. And so these 70 pages of letters, which are essentially disputes over who actually owns that land, which is complicated, are put into a software called Content DM, which is an archiving software. So this would be called, this is a digital surrogate of those physical documents. So trying to make them a little bit accessible to people so you can actually flip through them and read them. So they're digitally archived. Once we've digitally archived all of those letters and figured out what exactly they're saying, which again is a Herculean task for just this one reserve, this one Longloy family, who is Myaamia, they keep their land in Myaamia hands well into the 20th century. And so I don't know exactly what happens to each piece of this land, but this is how they map it out over the course of many, many generations. So it remains in Myaamia hands, parceled off, sold off, very, very piecemeal. Not the entire allotment sold, but I don't know, at least dozens and dozens of land sales, parcels, splits, wills, splitting it up amongst 7 grandchildren, that kind of thing. So this is what those documents look like if you map them in space. A canal goes through the land. They have to deal with a canal company. They have to deal with a railroad company. They have to deal with if memory serves, a gravel road company. The Wildcat and something gravel road, which is filling these pages. So in sum, looking at just this one reserve, we've attempted to make it accessible in different ways and relative to other things. Accessible in terms of you can read the documents, which are difficult to read, which are in Washington, D.C., where I do not live, making the map accessible so you can move around and browse and click on things, interactive, and then entering all that information into a usable archive, which is data-based, so that you can find it again and search it and browse it and do the things that we expect websites to do, at least archive websites. And I didn't have much room there, but the labor involved is immense. This is not automated. Maybe that's the next step. Train a computer to do it. Yeah. So this is really early days for this site, for this process. We've only done I don't want to say step 1, but we've only entered the treaties and allotments. The next question that I'm really interested in digging into is what actually happens once those allotments are granted to Myaamia individuals, reserved by Myaami individuals. What do they do with it, and how do they relinquish it or hold on to it over generations? We are not there yet, despite many years into this. So just with the treaties and the allotment events in the 1800s, 1900s, those treaties involve just in themselves over 550 individuals that all need to have names and unique IDs and births and deaths, and to the extent we can, involving 581 places that are reserves or allotments that are kept by the Myaami Nation as a whole, or Myaami individuals, or Myaami families. And the Content DM Digital Archive, which is the thing that holds those digital surrogates, has over 1,000 pages at the moment, and many more that are being prepared to be uploaded. These are my nerd slides. They're not as beautiful as the Breath of Life slides, but I think they're trying to say the same thing, which is how do you go from acquiring archival data to actually using it? Like that is hard. How do you collect it, catalog it, arrange it, retrieve it? What are the archives that you want to collect to make usable? I mean, I think there's an opportunity here for oral histories and personal knowledge from living people. I don't want to settle for just old documents in Washington, D.C., but what are your memories in this specific place? And how can we record those if you want to share them so that some second cousin in Oregon can learn from you? I think education people call that peer-to-peer learning. My college is community. So all of this background ends up over years in kind of the public site, which is based around a data set of people who are related to places, who are related to events that change those places and people. It doesn't have to be just treaties, but based on land ownership, that's what we focused on so far. It's the most accessible, seems important to people. What land is being transacted. Now that we have this tool, I'm interested to see what comes out of it. I have ideas, but you do too. what layers and maps do you want to see produced over the next year, 5 years, 10 years? I'm good at promising things or explain. I'm not going to make these maps, but we can translate these to the map makers, the GIS people. Genealogy, I think, is something that I have heard from a lot of community members to learn about their ancestors. What's very exciting about this is that this is a unique data set that allows extensive research across time and space. In other words, it's big data, which takes a lot of time, but I think there are interesting questions that we could ask from it. And for each of these points of entry, whether you're interested in people, whether you're interested in places or events, you can both browse and search those. So this is an architecture that's built to be big enough for a community's kind of needs and wants. And now we're in the process of filling those rooms. But I think there's some wiggle, there's some things that we can do in different rooms of that house to make it useful. One of the things that I always wanted was to be able to interrogate big data. So this is an example of something that I could do theoretically, which no one else can do. I mean, no other community can do. Other people can do what I do. What if I wanted to know all the female allottees in Kansas? I could click female Kansas allottees. Those are people who received land in Kansas in the allotment process. Boom, it would give me a list. I could add age at allotment. I could look at whether a river runs through it, and I would have this very intricate data set to understand the price of women's land sales near rivers, and I wouldn't be able to put that in context of anything else because no other communities, I think, have that big data set to compare it to. But maybe you could look at how does that compare to Oklahoma a generation or two later, something like that. I've been talking about data, and I wanted to return to something that Dr. Wesley Leonard mentioned on Thursday, which is, as he put it, we've been mined enough. And so borrowing an idea from my colleague Robin Abbott, who's our geography head, GIS coordinator, she said something I think really wonderful and beautiful, which is we're not doing this for the people in the black and white photos. We're doing it for our colleagues in the colored photos. And so I hope that I can talk about data in this context because this is a room filled with the people in the colored photos, living, breathing people. To review, but in a different context, I think it would be much more important to think about how can this be used, or is it used by living and breathing people today? So that's an open question. It's not all about real estate. That's something that we focused on. But we're also digitizing and making useful, hopefully, other data sets, such as cultural ecologies, place names. Is it .org or .com? So, kind of some of the developments that we're working on are exciting, I think, and if we have the ability to share this, I'll attempt to do it. But we've also made available more place names, which is very different from what I've been talking about. But I think, I'm just kind of thinking out loud about, what do people actually want from a map or an archive? And so you could zoom to, we've kind of categorized loosely categories of places such as towns or minotena, public cemeteries, historical ecologies like the Black Swamp, rivers, and other things that we have or want names for. And so if I can zoom in enough, the interrelation between tools is something that's going to play this, and it might be very quiet or very loud or not play at all. So we've connected a map with language so that theoretically you can browse starting with a place and it'll take you to the dictionary, and kind of the exploration or browsing, your curiosity might, there might be answers to your curiosity, hopefully. And so the place names that are in here are accessible through the dictionary as well. So I hope that you have ideas and come talk to me or someone about your ideas and what you'd be interested in. We're continuing to develop the database, which is the website, to make it usable to fix bugs and identify new features that might be useful. There's a lot of development ongoing with maps. Fortunately, we have a wonderful GIS coordinator and support for graduate assistants who are our technicians and cartographers. Research has taken a step, or has stopped for the moment while we collect things and make them useful and digitize them. We're interested in crowdsourcing, what you're willing to share. We have feedback on the site that you can leave messages. You can actually upload photos and images of places. So maybe some things that you might be interested in are, if you want to share, pictures of people that are listed here or not listed here. Pictures of places. We don't have many pictures of places, but if you are in a place, you could take theoretically a selfie of an allotment, and it could go up there to connect humans to the land, reconnect humans to the land, keep humans connected to the land. We wanted to say thank you to the Myaami Nation, Mishinewe, and to the National Endowment for the Humanities for supporting this. Mishinewe.